I'm gonna show you my round 2 game from Villard, and I played a 1700 rated opponent in the Panov Caro-Kann, one of my least favorite variations to face when I have black in the Caro-Kann. It was an extremely interesting game. So e4, c6, and my opponent goes for the Panov, takes, and c4. Now there are many ways to play against the Panov, but I play with the two knights, to f6 and c6, and now there are two main variations: knight f3 going for the endgame, or bishop g5 going for a complicated queenside majority position where white eventually advances with c5. He played bishop g5, and I have something else prepared now, and I had it at the time, but I had decided to play what I feel most comfortable with, which is bishop e6, and the idea is I eventually just want to take on c4. After a3, that really doesn't work because of d5, and I could get some pieces forked. This is the main line. So g6, since the bishop is on e6, the bishop from f8 will come to g7. And now white usually takes on f6. There's no need to allow bishop g7, and then bishop takes on f6. So bishop takes, e takes, slightly messing up my pawn structure, and he played bishop e2. Now this was a very surprising move. I know the idea, of course. The idea is bishop f3 followed by knight g2. White just wants to put pressure on d5, but there is a way to respond to this. So bishop to g7, and now bishop f3. Of course I cannot take on c4 because of d5, and I have to defend my pawn, so knight e7 is forced. And after this I have to deal with c5. Okay, so in the Panov Caro-Kann, white wants to play b4, b5, c6, create a passed pawn and win. However, white is leaving the weakness on d4 behind, and if you look at my bishop, an eventual f5 could be crushing. In many lines, black plays g5 and g4, misplacing this bishop as well, and maybe a kingside pawn storm. But in this case I just castled, which is fine. He played knight g2, and I went b6. I mean, you have to undermine the structure. It's very, very scary to play b4, which he did do, which is the best move. But it's scary because it leaves this diagonal wide open, and all of a sudden, white has to be careful tactically. So b4. Now, I took on c5, which the engine doesn't like. I was really struggling to understand the engine line here because I'm trying to learn this opening, or its middle game ideas better. So the engine plays g5, and after g3 it plays bishop h3, gets the bishop chased away back to e6, then the white bishop drops back to g2, and now the engine takes on c5 and says that this is equal. I don't understand what the difference between this position is and this one. Okay, the knight is on g1, but the idea positionally is still the same, take on c5. So this is worse than the engine line, but I never considered playing g5 and bishop h3. Okay, so my opponent surprised me here. bc5 seems unreasonable, but it's still the thematic move, and I wasn't really sure what he was going to do. bc5 and then an eventual knight c6 means that d4 is very weak, so he took with the d pawn. But now there are already problems along the diagonal. I played f5, opening up my bishop, and believe it or not, my opponent played the losing move here. He played a move that gives black an overwhelming advantage. He played knight d4. This is an understandable human move. However, this is no good. The king is still on e1. The knight on c3 is attacked as well. He just undefended it. If the knight goes back now, then I will have d4. I don't really care about my rook. If white ever wins my rook on a8, then queen a8 is a tempo on g2. So, of course I played knight c6. And to be honest, I was expecting my opponent to resign. I think against a much stronger opponent I would have resigned here. So let's look at the most obvious, knight takes c6. It's a tempo on the queen, but it doesn't matter because bishop c3 is check. And now after king f1, I just go queen f6. This is a double attack on the rook. The knight has no time to move. So let's say rook c1. I would have gone d4. As I said, I don't care about my rook on a8. So d4, knight e7 check, queen e7, bishop a8, rook a8, this is game over, completely over. The king is never gonna move, because g3 really isn't possible. I always have bishop d5. I also have something like bishop to c4 and then eventually just advancing my pawn. I can also overwhelm him down the e file, and since bishop c4 comes with check, I think this is a resignable position. The engine gives -5. What seemed to be the most logical is knight back to e2, but this is still losing. Just d4. He cannot take on c6, because if bishop c6, then I just attack the bishop, and either b5 or bishop f3, doesn't really matter. Let's say bishop f3. I take on c3, and I'm threatening c2, attacking the queen, attacking the rook. So let's assume queen takes queen, rook f takes, and what does he do now? My bishops are just too strong. This passed pawn is too strong. Let's assume castles. c2, rook a c1, bishop b3. I'm just gonna queen this pawn, or win the exchange, or both, or win the a3 pawn as well. Again, losing. My opponent played knight c2, and this is the best move according to the engine, but it's still very bad. I just didn't think it was the best move. And now, of course, knight takes d4. Knight takes d4, followed by queen f6, and that's about it. The only move is knight e6, taking on e6, where, of course, I don't take on a1 because of knight takes f8, but I simply check. Queen takes e6 is check, and now after the king has moved away, I just take on a1, and I'm up a full exchange. This is what happened in the game. It's -3 for black according to the engine, and, well, completely lost. Now, I played rook f8, which isn't the most precise. In a position like this, you're up the exchange, you have to convert, but there's a scary element to your opponent's position. So the first thing you should be thinking about is preventing counterplay. If the pieces get traded down, you're gonna win. If you ruin the queenside pawn structure and trade your a pawn for, let's say, the b pawn, you're gonna have an easy win. So you want to disrupt this pawn structure, you want to prevent white from developing this rook easily, and in my opinion, you don't want to open up this bishop by playing d4, which was a mistake, which you're gonna see later on. So I played rook f8, simply preventing the queen from moving and provoking g3, which I thought was interesting, and I was gonna go g5, g4. The engine plays rook f b8, which never occurred to me. My rook is now tied down on the a8 square. However, after something, the engine plays queen b2 here, so let's play queen b2. a5. If not queen b2, then a5 is much stronger. b5, and now queen c6. And there is no way to defend both pawns. If a4, queen c5, and you can see that my rook was never in trouble. I managed to win a pawn, and yeah, now with one passed pawn, this really isn't scary. Instead, I played rook f8, which is still fine, g3, g5. Of course, if white doesn't do anything now, then I could just go g4 followed by queen e2 or queen e1 with an even bigger advantage. He played queen d4, and I played rook a d8. If I play g4 now, then bishop takes, so that's no good. Rook a d8 defending the pawn, h3 preventing g4, and now I just played queen e5. I really don't mind the queen trade because I'm up the exchange. He took, which was surprising. I was expecting queen d2, against which I would have played h6. So takes, king g2, and now once again I played imprecisely. I played king f8, and my idea prophylactically was to get my king somewhere here. If my king is here, he's never queening. If he's never queening, I'm up the exchange, I'm gonna win. So I played king f8. The most precise way to play and win quickly was d4. And in the Panov Caro-Kann, if white's pawn majority never gets going, then white really doesn't have a clear plan. So let's say rook d1, d3, rook d2 has to be blockaded, and now just rook e1. And I'm gonna go over here, pick up the pawns. So b5, rook a1, that's about it. I just take the pawn. If b6, ab6, cb6, rook a3, white resigns. That's Very, very simple. Instead, I played king f8. b5, king e7, a4, king d7. It's still much better for black, and my king is going to be useful. But I could have converted this already, to put it mildly. A5, king c7. Now, a6 was interesting, and this I did consider. If a6, he of course doesn't take. If he takes, then rook a8, and I just pick up all the pawns. So b6, king c6. I saw this, and I was afraid to do it, because my d4 pawn is now completely tied down. Rook c1 has to defend the pawn, and now g4. This part I didn't see. H takes, f takes, bishop takes, and now rook e4. The idea is rook a4. There's no time to save the pawn. You have to save the bishop. And now rook a4. And the structure is falling apart. And I have a passed pawn. And this pawn is blockaded. And this one as well. But I played king c7. Still fine. b6 check, a b6, c b6, king b7. If you turned on the engine here, the engine plays king b7 with a big advantage to black. And if white plays a random move, let's say rook c1, then rook c8, and I don't know, king f1, for example, a takes b6, a takes b6, king c6 now is good. This is winning for black. In the game I took a b6 immediately, and this is equal. After c takes b6, king b7. Fortunately for me, my opponent did not play precisely. He should go rook c1 here, followed by rook c7. Instead he played rook a1, and now I'm back to winning. Because I don't play rook a8, which I played in the game, I play king a6, blockading. And the e2 square is covered, which is crucial, so both pawns have been stopped. I figured I'm gonna do that with my rook, and then I'm still fine. Which is, from a human perspective, true. He played king f1, trying to give himself bishop e2 as a resource. f6, bishop e2, h6. I don't really care about a6 now, because I can take the pawn on b6. And he surprised me, he played a6, and I couldn't figure out what's going on. I just took the pawn. The engine, of course, doesn't play that. The engine plays bishop f3 and says it's equal. But a6, king b6, black's winning. Rook b1, of course not rook a7, because rook b7 is checkmate. So king c6, rook c1, king d6, rook b1, and in this position I played what I thought was the simplest way to convert, and that's true. This is one of the best engine ideas, and it's also very practical. I just took the bishop, king takes, and rook takes a6. And now we are in a rook and king and rook endgame, rook and pawn endgame, where I'm up 2 pawns with a passed pawn, and it's just over. It's a winning endgame if you play precisely. Now what you're about to see is one of the worst displays of endgame technique from both sides. Not that it was a very simple win, as I'd assumed it was gonna be, but still. He played rook b8, king e5, moving in. This is correct. Rook a2, correct. King e1, you cannot really go to e3 because I play d4 with tempo, and then if you want to save your pawn, well, you cannot. King e1, pushing the king to the back rank, d4, best move. Rook e8, king d5, best move. Rook f8, rook h6, best move. My technique was perfect so far. Rook h8, I don't care about the pawn. King e4, best move. Rook takes h6, a big mistake. King f3, completely winning. The engine announces mate. My opponent played h4, and now I had 2 options. One of them was rook a1 check, where the king has to undefend the f2 pawn. The other one was rook e6 check, and I should have gone rook e6. Why didn't I go rook e6? I don't know. I remember looking at it during the game. The point is, rook a2 undefends my f6 pawn. Rook e6 does not. So same idea, forcing the king to f1 or losing the pawn, but my pawn on f6 is defended. Rook a1 is still winning, don't get me wrong, but rook e6 is easy. king d2. If king f1, I just queen my pawn. There's no discussion there. The rook is too slow. Because if, well, let's say d3. Let's say the rook tries to come back. I go d2, and now if you try to go rook d8, I just mate you. So you have to go king g1 to avoid checkmate, and then I'm up a queen. So on h4 I should have gone rook e6. So king d2. And now I don't take straight away, I play g4 first to prevent a trade because my rook is hanging, and there is no way to defend f2. So for example, king d3, king takes f2. If king d4, I just take, and yeah, I'm 3 connected passed pawns. Instead I played rook a1. -5, still winning, but not so easy. King d2, and I had calculated 7 moves deep from here. King takes f2, rook takes f6, g4 of course, keeping the pawns on the board, rook takes f5 check, king takes g3, h5. Okay, still my calculation, still happy, still completely winning, -6 according to the engine, relatively good technique. I played rook a6, makes sense, I want to blockade the h-pawn. He played king d3, rook d6, fine. Rook g5, king f3, I want to push my pawn, rook g6, and in this position I made the first pretty serious mistake. I played rook d8, still winning, but rook d5 was much better. Why? Because I'm on the pawn. I was afraid of doing this because of king c4. If king c4, of course, then I just take on h5. And if he takes on d4, I just queen. The king is never coming back. I'm gonna be up a rook. I played rook d8. Okay, still okay. Rook f6 check, king g3. I could have gone king g2 as well, but to give my pawn an extra square, but I wanted to prevent his king from being able to come to f4 in some positions, so I played king g3. I figured I wasn't in a rush, which is true. h6, and now another mistake, but this one, playing rook d5, a move too late, actually leads to a draw. So I'm up a pawn in a rook endgame. His king is far away from my g-pawn. However, his h-pawn is very good, so it's not a simple win. And rook d5 allows him to equalize, because the king is coming in. What I should have done is instead, well, king g2 is also bad, let me just say that, because of h7, I don't know, rook h8, rook h6, and there's no way to make progress. This is just a draw. What I should have done is rook d7. And now king e4 isn't a tempo, and he has to, well, cannot move the king because I push my pawn. So this is basically a Zugzwang move. He doesn't have any good moves. If he tries to do this, I still have a move. So if rook g6, then king f3. And if rook g7, then rook d6. And if h7, then rook h6. And once again, I'm just gonna queen my pawn. If here, then I just push. His king is too far away. In the game, though, I played rook d5. King e4, rook d7 now, so I'm always a tempo late with the good moves. King d3 losing again. And I played king h3, which is absurd. I should have gone king g2, which was, I think, better, but okay. He should have gone rook a6 instead of king d3. I played king h3, rook g6, rook h7, king d4, and now we are in a completely drawn endgame. On king e4, I really had no chance to win. However, after king d3, my opponent basically gave me the win. And instead of playing king g2, I played king h3. I should say that at this point I was really low on time. So king h3 seemed sensible. However, king h3 is a very bad move. Why is king g2 better? Well, on king g2, I don't know what white does, but let's say white waits. I go g3. Let's say the rook comes back. I go king f2. And how do you prevent me from queening? If rook f6, then king g1. So on king g2, let's say rook here. I push. Hard to suggest to move. Rook h7. I'm just queening my pawn. On king h3, the same thing doesn't work. He played rook g6. And now if I try pushing with g3, he plays rook g7. And what do? I have to play rook d6. He plays h7, I play rook h6, and it's going to be a draw. Something similar happened in the game, so I'm going to show you what happened in the game. Let me just say that after king g2, if rook g6, g3, rook g7, I now go rook d6, and on h7, I go here. And on king takes d4, for example, I go king f2. And there's no stopping this pawn. What happened in the game was king h3, rook g6, rook h7 immediately. I wanted to prevent rook g7. If I push my pawn, rook g7, rook d6, h7, rook h6, king takes d4. If g2, then king e3. And my king is too far away. You can see that the difference is that his king is able to come into the position. Noticing that in this position, king h3 would allow his king to come close to the g pawn was beyond me at the time. So this is how the game ended. If he moves towards my pawn, then I am winning. But he correctly got his king close to the h pawn, and I was forced to take, and we agreed to a draw here. I have no way to win this position. This was round 2 of the tournament, and you can imagine that after having won in round 1 and having gotten a completely winning position in round 2, I was devastated to draw the game, and especially since this was a double round day, I now had to play a game. Oh, maybe it wasn't a double round day. I don't remember, actually. I'll check. But in any case, I had to go into round 3 with a minus score, with rating, and with the feeling of annoyance, to put it mildly. Let me know what you think. I hope you liked the game, and stay tuned for more chess. Bye-bye.